When my son looked me in the eyes and said, "Mom, you've become a liability. We can't afford to keep you around anymore," I actually thanked him for being honest. That's how beaten down I was. 3 weeks later, I was sitting across from a federal prosecutor who wanted to know everything about Harold's secret empire, and my son was about to discover that the woman he'd dismissed as senile was holding the keys to his destruction. If you're listening to this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story taught me that sometimes the people who know you best understand you the least. Let me take you back to the beginning. For 41 years, I was Eleanor Mitchell, devoted wife to Harold, mother to one son who I'd apparently loved too much and disciplined too little. When Harold collapsed in our garden last spring, pruning the roses he'd tended for 3 decades, I thought my heart would stop with his. Daniel arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after I called, already wearing his business face. My son had become a real estate developer, successful enough to afford Italian suits, and a wife named Stephanie, who collected designer handbags like other women collect memories. They lived in a gated community 20 minutes away, but visited maybe twice a year. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," Daniel said before Harold's body was even cold. Stephanie stood behind him, already scrolling through her phone. "The house? Dad's beach house, the Monterey property. It's worth at least $4 million now, and with the market being what it is, we should sell quickly." I stared at my son, unable to process his words. Harold had died 3 hours ago. "Daniel, your father isn't even. I know this is hard, Mom, but someone has to think practically. You can't possibly manage that property alone. The maintenance, the property taxes, the stairs down to the beach. It's not safe for someone your age." Someone your age. I was 68, not 98. I still did yoga 3 times a week and could outwalk most of my neighbors. But I said nothing. I'd spent 4 decades being the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over Harold's gruffness and excused Daniel's selfishness. It was easier to stay quiet. The weeks after the funeral blurred together. Daniel and Stephanie descended on our home in Pacific Grove, like locusts in Armani. They cataloged Harold's wine collection, appraised his art, measured rooms with a laser device that beeped every time they pointed it at something valuable. "Mom, have you thought about what we discussed?" Daniel asked one evening, his 3rd glass of Harold's expensive Bordeaux in hand. "About selling the house. About everything. Dad's estate needs to be settled. The investments, the properties, the business accounts. Stephanie and I have been looking into it, and honestly, it's more complicated than we expected." I didn't know what he meant. Harold had always handled the finances. He'd shown me statements occasionally, explained his investment strategy in terms I pretended to understand. But I'd never paid close attention. That was his domain. Mine was making sure dinner was ready and the house felt like home. "What do you need from me?" Daniel and Stephanie exchanged a look that I should have recognized, but didn't. "We need you to sign some documents, Mom. Standard estate stuff, power of attorney, asset transfers, that kind of thing." I signed where they pointed. I trusted my son. That was my first mistake. The eviction came on a Tuesday, exactly 6 weeks after Harold's death. Daniel arrived with Stephanie and a man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as their attorney. They found me in the garden, kneeling in the dirt where Harold had collapsed, trying to save the roses he'd left behind. "Mom, we have some news." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the movement. Daniel's face was composed, businesslike, the expression he probably used when closing deals. "Dad's will has been processed, and I'm afraid the results aren't what you expected." "What do you mean?" The attorney stepped forward, holding a folder. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband's estate was valued at approximately $28 million, including properties, investments, and business holdings. According to the will filed with the probate court, the entirety of these assets were left to your son Daniel, with the exception of a monthly stipend of $2,000 to be paid to you for living expenses." The garden tilted. $28 million. I'd had no idea Harold was worth that much. He'd always been frugal, complaining about the cost of groceries, driving the same car for 15 years. I thought we were comfortable, not wealthy. "That can't be right," I whispered. "Harold would never." I'm sorry, Mom, but it's all legal. Dad wanted me to manage the family legacy. He knew you wouldn't understand the complexities involved. Stephanie stepped forward, her smile sympathetic in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor, we've found a lovely assisted living facility in Fresno, very affordable on your stipend. They have activities, people your own age, no responsibilities. Fresno. 4 hours from the ocean Harold and I had loved, from the home we'd built together, from every memory that mattered. This is my home, I said, my voice cracking. I've lived here for 37 years. Actually, Mom, according to the will, it's my home now. Has been for 6 weeks, legally speaking. I've been letting you stay out of kindness, but Stephanie and I need to start renovations. We're turning the property into a vacation rental. The income potential is incredible. I looked at my son, searching for the little boy who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd held my hand on his first day of kindergarten, who'd promised to take care of me when he grew up. That boy was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed. Daniel, please. This is the only home I know. My son's face hardened. Mom, let's be real here. You've become a liability. You don't contribute anything. You don't understand money. You just exist, taking up space in a house worth $4 million. The words hit me like physical blows. Liability. Don't contribute, just exist. Stephanie handed me a glossy brochure. Sunset Gardens Senior Community. They have a room available next week. Daniel will cover your first month as a kindness. A kindness. My son was kicking me out of my home and calling it kindness. I packed 41 years of marriage into 3 suitcases. Family photos, Harold's favorite cardigan, the pearl earrings he'd given me on our 20th anniversary. Everything else would be sold, donated, or thrown away by people who saw my memories as clutter. Daniel waited by the door, checking his watch. The movers are coming tomorrow for Dad's study. I'm converting it into a home office. I'll send you the address of the storage unit where we're putting your things. You can sort through them when you get settled. When I get settled. In a facility for people waiting to die. Daniel, can I ask you something? Make it quick, Mom. We have contractors coming. Did your father really leave me nothing? In 41 years of marriage, did he really think so little of me? My son's expression flickered, just for a moment. Something that might have been guilt, or might have been irritation at an inconvenient question. Dad was a practical man. He knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. Now please, Mom. The cab is waiting. I left my home in a yellow taxi, watching through the rear window as Daniel and Stephanie walked through the front door of what used to be my life. Stephanie was already on her phone, probably calling decorators. The motel was called Ocean View, though the only view was of a parking lot and a liquor store. $49 a night, paid with the $300 in cash Daniel had pressed into my hand as a transition fund. I sat on the thin mattress and tried to understand what had happened. How had 41 years of love and partnership led to this moldy room with water stains on the ceiling? But as the shock wore off, something began nagging at me. Harold had been many things. Stubborn, private, sometimes distant. But he wasn't cruel. The man who'd nursed me through cancer, who'd held me when my mother died, who'd built a greenhouse specifically for my orchids, that man wouldn't have left me destitute. Harold had shown me his will once, years ago. I remembered the conversation, sitting in his study while he explained his wishes. He'd said something about making sure I was protected, making sure I'd never have to worry. The will Daniel showed me protected nothing except Daniel's bank account. The next morning, I used the motel's ancient computer to search for Harold's attorney. Gregory Okonkwo was a distinguished estate lawyer Harold had worked with for decades. His office was in downtown Monterey, a 40-minute bus ride that cost me precious cash. When I walked into his office, Gregory's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, and then something that looked like relief. Eleanor! Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your son said you were traveling, that you'd moved out of state, that you didn't want to be contacted about estate matters. Traveling. Another lie. Gregory, I need to see Harold's will. The real one. He looked confused. You weren't at the reading. What reading? Gregory's expression darkened. He pressed a button on his phone. Sandra, cancel my next appointment and pull the Mitchell estate file, the original file. As his assistant retrieved the documents, Gregory explained what should have happened. A formal reading with all beneficiaries present, direct communication with the surviving spouse, a careful explanation of Harold's wishes by the attorney who drafted them. None of that had happened. Daniel had intercepted everything. Gregory, my son showed me a will that left him everything except a small monthly stipend. He moved into our house. He sent me to a motel with $300. The elderly attorney's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder. Eleanor, I don't know what documents your son showed you, but they weren't the will I drafted and Harold signed. He began reading aloud, and with every word, the world I thought I knew crumbled and rebuilt itself into something entirely different. I, Harold James Mitchell, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Eleanor Ann Mitchell, the following. Our primary residence at Tamcham Bonmui by Sunset Drive in Pacific Grove, California, including all furnishings and contents. Additionally, I leave her 75% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $21 million. $21 million, the house, 75% of everything. Gregory continued reading. To my son, Daniel Raymond Mitchell, I leave the remaining 25% of assets, approximately $7 million, to be held in trust until his 50th birthday, with early distributions permitted only upon demonstration of genuine care and respect for his mother's well-being. Harold had known. He'd seen what I refused to see. There's a clause, Eleanor, a very specific clause, Harold insisted on adding when he updated the will 18 months ago. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. If Daniel fails to treat Eleanor with the dignity, respect, and care she deserves following my death, or if he attempts to deprive her of her rightful inheritance through deception, manipulation, or legal maneuvering, his entire $7 million inheritance reverts to Eleanor instead. The room swam. Harold had been watching Daniel more carefully than I knew. He'd built a trap for our son's greed, a test of character that Daniel had failed spectacularly. Gregory, are you telling me that Daniel gets nothing now? I'm telling you that Daniel just forfeited everything. You're not inheriting $21 million, Eleanor. You're inheriting $28 million, plus the house, plus all personal property. And your son is looking at federal charges for elder fraud and forgery. I thought about Daniel in my house, measuring rooms with his laser device, planning his renovation empire with Harold's money. He had no idea that every step he'd taken was digging himself deeper into a trap Harold had set from beyond the grave. What do I do now? Gregory smiled, the first warmth I'd seen since walking into his office. Now we call the police. And then we call Daniel and watch his world collapse. Gregory's office became command central. He contacted the county prosecutor, the State Bar Association, and a forensic document examiner while I sat in a leather chair, still processing the magnitude of Daniel's betrayal. The forged will is professionally done, Detective Ramirez explained after examining Daniel's documents. Someone with legal training helped create this. We'll need to investigate your son's connections, possibly his wife as well. Within 3 hours, Daniel's accounts were frozen. The credit cards he'd been using, the business accounts he thought he'd inherited, the renovation funds he'd been drawing from, all locked pending investigation. My phone rang at exactly Bon, Mui Lampe, Ma. Mom, what the hell is happening? The bank froze all of Dad's accounts. They're saying there's a fraud investigation. Hello, Daniel. I'm sitting in Gregory Okonkwo's office. You remember him? Your father's actual attorney? The one who drafted the real will? Silence. Then, Mom, I don't know what he told you, but those documents I showed you were absolutely legitimate. Were they, Daniel? Because the will Gregory has, the one Harold signed in front of witnesses 18 months ago, says something very different. It says I inherit everything, including the $7 million you just forfeited by throwing your mother out of her home. I could almost hear Daniel's mind racing, searching for an angle, an excuse, a manipulation. Mom, you're confused. The grief has affected your judgment. Someone is taking advantage of your emotional state. The audacity. Even caught in his lies, Daniel was still trying to make me the problem. Daniel, let me be clear. Not only did you never inherit anything, but the trust your father set up for you is now mine as well. Thanks to a clause about treating me with dignity. Remember dignity, Daniel? That thing you said I'd lost? That's impossible. Detective Ramirez is sitting right here. If you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with her. Mom, please, let's meet and talk about this like family. Family. Something cold crystallized in my chest. Family doesn't forge legal documents. Family doesn't steal inheritances. Family doesn't call their mother a liability and throw her out like garbage. I didn't mean. Detective Ramirez is processing your arrest warrant right now. I'd suggest you find a good lawyer. Not the one who helped you forge those documents, obviously. He'll need his own attorney. I hung up. Gregory was watching me with something like admiration. Eleanor, I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen this side of you. Neither have I admitted. Apparently, it takes losing everything to find out who you really are. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Mom, please don't do this. Think about the grandchildren. Madison and Tyler don't deserve to have their father in prison. I showed the message to Detective Ramirez, who shook her head. Classic manipulation pattern. Using children as shields. I typed back. Madison and Tyler deserve a father who doesn't commit federal crimes. Maybe prison will teach him what I couldn't. 20 minutes later, Stephanie called. Eleanor, surely we can resolve this privately. Daniel made some poor decisions, but involving the police seems excessive. We're family. Stephanie, we've never been family. You've tolerated me at holidays while counting down the days until you could inherit our money. Don't pretend otherwise now. Eleanor, be reasonable. Think about your reputation. An elderly woman pressing charges against her own son? People will talk. Let them talk. I spent 41 years being reasonable. It made me invisible. What do you want? Money? We can set up a proper trust, give you a beautiful apartment, anything you need. I don't want your money, Stephanie. It was never yours to offer. What I want is for my son to face the consequences of his choices. Something I should have enforced when he was 6 and stole candy from the corner store. Daniel was arrested at Jean home while hosting a dinner party to celebrate his inheritance. According to Detective Ramirez, he screamed about false arrest and demanded to call his family attorney, who turned out to be a golf buddy with no criminal experience. Stephanie was arrested the next morning. The forensic accountant had traced the forged will to a print shop that Stephanie's cousin owned, the same shop that had created fraudulent documents for 3 other estate fraud cases in the region. My son had married into a family business I'd never imagined. I spent my first night back in my house, sleeping in the master bedroom. Daniel and Stephanie had already redecorated, replacing Harold's careful minimalism with their gaudy excess. Gold fixtures, marble countertops, artwork that cost more than most people's cars. I packed all of it into boxes and left them on the front porch for goodwill. The house felt different now. Not because Harold was gone, but because I was finally seeing it as mine. For 4 decades, I'd maintained it as Harold's sanctuary. Now, I would transform it into something that reflected who I actually was, whoever that turned out to be. Gregory called with updates throughout the week. Daniel's bail was set at 75 không. Stephanie's at 100 không. With their accounts frozen, they'd have to find outside help. Daniel's been calling everyone he knows, Gregory reported. His business partners, his college friends, even distant relatives. No one wants to touch this case. What about Stephanie's family? Her parents hung up when they found out she'd been arrested. Apparently, they knew about the print shop business and warned her not to get involved. The isolation of consequences. Daniel and Stephanie had built their lives on charm and connections, never imagining a world where no one wanted to be associated with them. 2 days later, my granddaughter Madison appeared at my door. At 19, Madison was everything her father wasn't. Thoughtful, principled, quietly fierce. She'd chosen a state college over the prestigious university Daniel had demanded, worked part-time at a wildlife rescue, and had been distant from her parents since high school. Grandma, I heard what happened. Can I come in? I hadn't seen Madison in almost a year. Daniel had stopped inviting me to family events, claiming I made Stephanie uncomfortable. Of course, sweetheart. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught her to bake cookies when she was 7. Grandma, I need to tell you something. Something I've been keeping secret for 2 years. I waited, watching her young face struggle with whatever truth she was carrying. Grandpa knew. About Dad, about what Dad was planning. My heart stopped. What do you mean? 2 years ago, I found some emails on Dad's computer. He was talking to someone about the estate plan and managing Mom's expectations. I didn't understand at first, but then I realized they were planning to take everything when Grandpa died. Madison, I told Grandpa. I showed him the emails. He was so calm about it, Grandma. He said he'd always suspected Daniel wasn't the man he'd hoped, but he'd never had proof. He thanked me for my honesty and made me promise not to tell anyone. The pieces were falling into place. Harold's will, update 18 months ago. The dignity clause, the trust conditions. He'd been building his trap with evidence Madison had provided. There's more, Madison continued. Grandpa set up a separate trust. Just for me. He said it was for being brave enough to tell him the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. How much? $2 million. I can access it when I turn 21 or when I graduate from college, whichever comes first. Harold, even in death, was taking care of the people who deserved it. Madison, you could have warned me when your grandfather died. Tears filled her eyes. I wanted to, Grandma, so badly, but Grandpa made me promise to let his plan work. He said Dad needed to reveal his true character publicly, completely, with no room for excuses. He said that was the only way you'd finally see who Daniel really was. She was right. If Madison had warned me, I would have confronted Daniel privately. I would have given him chances to explain, to apologize, to promise change. I would have enabled his behavior the way I'd enabled it his entire life. Harold had known me better than I knew myself. Grandma, there's something else. Something Grandpa left for you. Something he said I should only give you after Dad showed his true colors. She pulled out her phone and pressed play on a video. Harold appeared on screen, sitting in his study, looking directly at the camera with an expression I recognized. The look he wore when he was about to say something important. Eleanor, my love, if you're watching this, it means everything I feared about Daniel has come true. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. You would have made excuses for him, the way you always do, and I needed you to see the truth without any filter. His voice cracked slightly. I spent 41 years watching you sacrifice everything for our family. Your career, your dreams, your sense of self. You gave up so much to be the wife and mother you thought we needed, and I let you. Because it was easier. Because I was selfish. Because I didn't know how to tell you that you deserved more than a supporting role in your own life. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I couldn't look away. Daniel got my worst qualities. My ambition. My focus on money. My tendency to see people as useful or useless. But he didn't get the things that mattered, the things that came from you. Kindness, patience, the ability to love unconditionally. That's why I'm leaving everything to you, Eleanor. Not because I don't love our son, but because I love you more, and because I trust that you'll find a way to build something meaningful with what I'm leaving behind. The video continued for several more minutes. Harold explaining his investment strategy, his hopes for the future, his belief that I was stronger than I knew. By the end, I was sobbing, and Madison was holding my hand. He loved you so much, Grandma. He talked about you all the time when we were alone. He said you were the best decision he ever made. That night, after Madison left, I walked through my house seeing it with new eyes, Harold's eyes, a home he'd built for a woman he'd loved for 4 decades, hoping she'd eventually claim it as her own. Tomorrow, I would start making changes, but tonight, I sat in his study, surrounded by his books and his memories, and I let myself grieve properly for the first time, not just for Harold, but for the son I'd lost long before his arrest. The trial took 8 months. Daniel and Stephanie both pleaded guilty to avoid longer sentences, accepting 2 years in federal prison for elder fraud, forgery, and attempted extortion. Detective Ramirez told me they'd tried to negotiate immunity by providing information about other estate fraud cases, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in deals. Your son wanted to testify against Stephanie's family, she said. Throw them under the bus to reduce his sentence. Classic survival move. What did Stephanie do when she found out? Filed for divorce. They're not speaking. The consequences rippled outward. Daniel's real estate business collapsed. His partners distanced themselves. Clients demanded refunds, and 3 lawsuits were filed for projects that suddenly seemed questionable. Stephanie's parents were investigated for the print shop operation. 2 of her cousins were arrested for their roles in other fraud cases. A family business built on deception finally faced sunlight, and I became something I never expected. A symbol. The story caught media attention. A 68-year-old widow fighting back against elder abuse, uncovering fraud, and reclaiming her dignity made compelling news. Channel Num wanted an interview. The Monterey Herald wrote a feature. A podcast about financial crimes dedicated an episode to my case. At first, I said no to everything. I'd spent my whole life avoiding attention. But Madison convinced me to reconsider. Grandma, there are so many elderly people being exploited by their own families. If your story helps even one of them recognize the warning signs, isn't that worth the discomfort? She was right. Of course she was right. Madison had Harold's strategic mind and my buried sense of justice. I did the interview, then another. Then a speaking engagement at a senior center where I met women who'd been through similar betrayals. Their stories were heartbreaking. Daughters who'd emptied bank accounts, sons who'd forged powers of attorney, grandchildren who'd stolen Social Security checks. Elder abuse was an epidemic, and most victims stayed silent out of shame and family loyalty. I decided to stop being silent. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Elder Rights launched 6 months after Daniel's sentencing, using $10 million of my inheritance. We funded legal aid for seniors facing financial exploitation, supported legislation for stronger elder protection laws, and created educational programs about recognizing family fraud. Gregory helped me structure everything. Madison joined the board, bringing her generation's perspective to our work. We hired former prosecutors, social workers, and financial experts who understood how elder abuse worked and how to fight it. The foundation's first year helped Tamchambonmuibay seniors recover assets or escape exploitative situations. We trained high-chum social workers to recognize financial abuse. We lobbied for 3 state laws that strengthened elder protections. And I discovered something unexpected. Purpose. For 41 years, I'd defined myself through others. Harold's wife, Daniel's mother, a supporting character in everyone else's story. Now, at 69, I was finally the protagonist of my own life. A year after Daniel's arrest, I stood in my renovated living room, preparing for a documentary crew who was filming my story for a streaming service. The house looked nothing like it had when Harold was alive. I'd replaced his dark furniture with light colors, his abstract art with photographs of places I wanted to visit, his formal garden with a wildflower meadow. The changes weren't about erasing Harold, they were about finally claiming space for myself. My phone buzzed. A letter from Daniel, forwarded by his prison's mail system. He'd written 12 times since his sentencing. I'd read the first 3 letters. Angry, then self-pitying, then manipulative attempts at reconciliation. I'd stopped reading after that. This letter I threw away unopened. Some relationships, once broken, can't be repaired with words. Daniel had made his choice when he called me a liability. I'd made mine when I pressed charges. Madison visited every Sunday now. She'd graduated college early, joined the foundation full-time, and started dating a young lawyer who specialized in elder law. Harold's trust had funded her education and given her options, but she'd built her own path. Tyler, her younger brother, was more complicated. At 17, he was still processing his parents' crimes and their divorce. He visited occasionally, awkward and uncertain, trying to understand what had happened to his family. I didn't push. Tyler would find his own way to the truth, just as Madison had. All I could do was leave the door open. Mrs. Mitchell? We're ready for you. The documentary director was a young woman named Priya, who'd survived her own family's financial exploitation. She'd found my story through the foundation and pitched the project as a way to reach audiences who might recognize themselves in my experience. Eleanor, I said, settling into the interview chair. Call me Eleanor. Eleanor, we're going to start with a simple question. Looking back at everything that happened, what would you tell other women in similar situations? I thought about the question. About the motel room where I'd hit bottom. About the moment I decided to stop being invisible. About the year of fighting, building, and discovering who I actually was underneath 4 decades of self-erasure. I'd tell them that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. That the people who underestimate you have given you your greatest advantage. And that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something your enemies never imagined you could create. And what about forgiveness? Do you think you'll ever forgive your son? I paused, considering. It was the question everyone asked, the one that made audiences uncomfortable with its complexity. Forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Maybe someday I'll find peace with what Daniel did, but that peace won't come from pretending his actions were acceptable or from rebuilding a relationship based on guilt and obligation. If Daniel truly changes, truly becomes a different person, then perhaps we can have a different kind of relationship. But that's his work to do, not mine. The interview continued for 3 more hours. I told my story from beginning to end. The shock, the betrayal, the discovery, the fight, the transformation. By the end, I was exhausted but satisfied. I'd spent 41 years being quiet. Now I was using my voice for something that mattered. After the crew left, I walked through my house, touching the walls I'd painted myself, the furniture I'd chosen, the photographs of a life I was still building. Through the window, I could see my wildflower garden blooming in the late afternoon sun. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with state legislators about elder protection laws. Next week, the foundation was opening a satellite office in San Francisco. Next month, the documentary would premiere, hopefully reaching thousands of people who needed to hear that survival was possible. And next year? I had no idea. For the first time in my life, that uncertainty felt like freedom. Harold had been right. I was stronger than I knew. It just took losing everything to find out. Thanks for listening. If you found this story helpful, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, it's never too late to become the hero of your own life.